Alright, so this video is going to be about Act 3 of Othello, and it's actually a pretty quick act to look through. There is a very important scene or two in it. However, the act is really a propelling act. It's really to get the play really moving in action. That's what the focus is for this act. So as we look at it, there's going to be a lot of plot significance to it, much more than detailed significance of textual analysis. So be ready for that in this quick video. It will probably be a little bit shorter than some of the others. This act begins with a clown making comments about musical instruments and kind of taking the use of the word instrument and using it in some very bodily humor way, quite crude, which is a very typical thing for Shakespeare to do, because in Act 2, at the end of Act 2, we just had a very serious scene. So Shakespeare likes to sort of switch things up and give people a release of tension. And he does that by creating a sort of half scene or a scene within certain plays to give people that break. And so the Elizabethan audience would have immediately picked up the clown as sort of taking the word instruments and the music that's being played as a celebration to Othello and his marriage to Desdemona as sort of a negative sex humor, genital humor way. And so that's what the clown is doing here at the beginning of this scene. So if you're not quite understanding what he's saying, feel free to go and look it up and try to really understand the text of what he's really making jokes at there. So the clown does that, and at the end of his speech, he says, if Othello really liked music, he would pay these people to stop playing because they are so bad at creating music. So that's sort of this comedic break that we have, and then we immediately begin getting into the action of Act 1. In Scene 2 of Act 3, you just have like 4 lines, and it's basically just Othello in a situation where he's he's doing the duties that an officer would do or that a commander would do in that situation. There's not a lot to it as far as what it means and its significance. I mean, it's 4 lines, probably just to contrast how he's in charge here compared to how much he's not in charge in Scene 3. Is sort of he's taken over by Iago and jealousy in Scene 3. In Scene 3, when Amelia comments that there's this rift between Othello and Cassio, she says that it grieves her husband, and this shows us how Iago has really deeply managed to deceive even his own wife, because she even doesn't suspect how evil he is in his nature and what he's setting up to do. Now, this is an example of dramatic irony, and this is something you should know, but considering that most of you probably are not English majors, then we will continue and we'll talk a little bit about irony here. Anyway, so this is a sense of dramatic irony, and Desdemona also further remarks here at the beginning that she calls Iago an honest fellow, and that's also a sense of irony here. Now, dramatic irony is simply when the audience knows something that the audience or the reader knows something that the characters within the play or the novel or whatever it is do not know. And so we know that Iago's evil, but they don't. And so that's a sense of dramatic irony. Now let's look at a few forms of irony for us. So there are 3 simple types of irony. First is verbal irony, and that's when someone says something but they mean the opposite. So if you get a bad grade and you're like, oh, super, cannot wait to, fix this grade. This is going to be great, wonderful. Or you're really ecstatic about taking a test. Oh, wonderful, can't wait to take this test, right? Those are senses of verbal irony. Sarcasm, satire, these are great examples of the ways that we do verbal irony. Now, situational irony is when you expect one thing, but the opposite happens. So this would be, I remember reading a story where a woman is waiting for her husband to die, and she can't stand him, and then but she's hanging on, and then she realizes that her husband is is going to leave in his will all the money to their dog. So she divorces the husbands and marries the dog. And that's a story, and that's a sense of situational irony. We expect one thing to happen. We expect the husband to die off and her to get the money, or the husband to maybe like not leave the will to her and she doesn't get it or whatever. But there's this change that happens, and the opposite of what we think is going to happen happens. And that's situational irony. And then, of course, primarily in this play, Othello is dramatic irony. And like I just said, it's when we have more information as the readers, as the audience, about the circumstances than the character. And so we know that Iago's evil, but everybody in the play is constantly talking about how honest he is. This shows how much he's manipulated everybody. So that's an example of dramatic irony. So Iago replies with this certain sort of uncertain idea to Othello. He begins sort of poking at Othello, as we said earlier in an earlier video, that Iago is going to do 1,000 little cuts onto Othello, and that's how he gets at Othello. So he just sort of pokes and prods and suggests that there's these inappropriate things going on between Cassio and Desdemona to Othello. And so the conversation that Othello and Iago have, he's really just like, oh, I saw them together, but I'm sure it's nothing. I saw them, but nah, I mean, it wasn't anything. But maybe it wasn't. And that's how he begins to raise Othello's suspicions about Cassio and Desdemona. So Iago then even responds to Othello and says, hey, Othello, you know what? Don't be jealous. Jealousy is this green-eyed monster, right? And this is a very famous line from Othello, and talking about what jealousy does. And Othello is like, you know what? You're right. I should not be jealous. I'm not going to do it because she has proven to me that she chose me, and that's her proof to me that she loves me. And so Iago's, kind of building up his confidence in that. And he's like, yeah, you know what? You're right. But Othello, she also did deceive her father when she married you. So we know, and he takes that proof of her at one point deceiving somebody and suggesting that that's a form of deception that we know that Desdemona has enacted. And he even suggests that, hey, remember Brabantio thought it was witchcraft. And so he's playing on Othello's susceptibility to also his belief in magic and to feed those doubts. Then he even raises the issue. He says, you know what? You also don't get the way that we are here, and you are an outsider, Othello. And he makes Othello recognize his position as an outsider, and Othello says, yeah, I'm black, and I've not seen these types of conversations. I'm not able to enter into this. I'm a commander, and so he feeds into who Othello is as part of that manipulation tactic to really make Othello susceptible to jealousy. So then Amelia, his wife, picks up the handkerchief when Desdemona drops it. And as soon as Iago realizes that she has it, he immediately takes it from her. And this is what is going to give him that sort of unexpected ocular proof. Ocular proof is what Shakespeare will call it, and Othello will call it. Ocular proof is simply proof with the eyes. It's sort of the idea of empirical proof, right? And Othello will soon demand this in order to be convinced of Desdemona's infidelity. So at this point in the scheme, Iago has sufficiently aroused Othello's jealousy so that all the undetectable administrations of poison, which at the first scarce were found to distaste, have begun to burn like the mines of sulfur as they course through Othello's body. So I don't know if you have ever been prone to jealousy. It is a definite great description of the idea of jealousy. If you have a friend that you don't trust, a girlfriend, a spouse that you are not able to trust for some reason because they've been deceptive or they've disappointed you, and there's this real sense of little things that just sort of cut at you. Maybe they don't text you right back. Maybe they don't, these are all forms of what we would call an unhealthy imbalance of jealousy. that you are not giving them the benefit of the doubt here. And so that's what Iago has done to Othello. He's made it to where Othello is constantly worried about what Desdemona is doing and how she interacts with him. Now, Iago is convinced that there is nothing. He's convinced that there is nothing that will save Othello. That everything he's given to Othello is he's poisoned him enough that it's going to kill Othello. It's going to kill him with jealousy, right? So that's the idea, that it's going to destroy him. And that's what he's wanting to do, which is a sense of foreshadowing as well, because I don't know to the extreme that how much Iago wants to completely destroy everybody in the play, but what he's setting up is definitely something that nobody can turn back from. Now, at this point, though, Othello has lost it so much that he feels that he's just gone crazy. And so he's lost the very thing that is his pride as a military leader, and that is the ability to think rationally with his mind. That's what's made him a great military leader. And so when his senses returns, he demands that Iago give him ocular proof of Desdemona's infidelity. And so Othello warns him, hey, if you don't give me real proof, I'm gonna turn this anger around on you. And so that's the proof that he is wanting from Iago. So Act 3, Scene 3 really represents sort of the turning point for Othello as he borders on doubt and certainty with respect to Desdemona's fidelity and also Iago's honesty. This is the point where he's really not going to be able to turn around. It's really the point of vulnerability that Iago needs to ensure his plan will work. Iago even comments that Othello's eaten up with passion. And so what he does then is he begins to plague Othello's mind with very animal-like, very similar to what he did earlier with Brabantio, very animal-like imagery of Cassio and Desdemona being together. So he really sort of indulges that sort of negative fantasy to Othello. And that's what he's doing throughout this. Now, this scene progresses from Iago's planting seeds of doubt to Othello's mind to Othello vowing vengeance with Cassio's death, and sort of how he's going to go about killing Cassio and Desdemona. In scene 4, Othello enters and he asks for the handkerchief. And the significance of the handkerchief to Othello is going to become much more clear because he talks about how it was given to his mother by an Egyptian who was a charmer and could read. And so he feels that there's magic in the web of the handkerchief. So when Iago and Cassio enter, Cassio asks Desdemona to hurry up with her plea to Othello, and she says that she will do what she can. Desdemona is not aware that this action is actually going to fulfill Iago's admonition to Othello in the previous scene. So what's happening here is really that there's this perfect storm happening, right? You have a sort of just a combustible conglomeration of conflict. And what we mean by that, and what I mean by that is the one thing Othello wants is he wants Desdemona to have this handkerchief, to show her love for him, to prove that love. But the one thing that Desdemona wants is to show Cassio that she's supporting Cassio at this point, and she knows that Cassio is a good leader, and she wants to put that in there. But by both of them having these material needs that they have set in place, it's creating the real combustibility of the conflict between them, right? They are going to be unable to truly come back from this action as they see in each other that they both cannot fulfill this what each other is asking at this point, and it makes it worse rather than better. So it's a perfect storm. And so at the end of the scene, the handkerchief is becoming even more significant because Cassio is going to give it to Bianca for her to copy its design. Iago's attempt to plant it in Cassio's lodging has been successful, and Cassio inadvertently then therefore becomes trapped in the plot as well. And that's really Act 3. It's a lot of action. It's a lot of movement. We see the symbol of the handkerchief coming to fruition, and we see it's really the turning point for Othello. it's where Othello has really become rooted in jealousy, and he's probably not going to be able to bounce back from it.